Tonight we're hosting our meeting for Galway-West on higher education. Absolutely delighted that we've got Senator Hoey here, who's our keynote speaker, and delighted Padraic Toomey, President of the Students' Union in NUIG Galway, and to Ciara Glasscott, who is in charge of the Postgrad Workers Alliance in NUIG. And I'm really looking forward to having you guys just outline what your campaigns and all that at the moment. I suppose for me, it's very, very important that we're talking about this in Galway, because of the fact is that Galway is a college town, and we're very pride ourselves on town and gown for so much and for so long. But also is the fact is that part of what we're talking about tonight is inclusion in higher education. And I'm sure Annie, you know this about Galway, like we're known as the city of tribes, but we're also actually got the highest percentage. With 22% of our population was born outside of our country. So when we, even with that birthright citizenship campaign we're running at the moment, shows you how important Galway is. And you know, when you think about it, we're a Gaeltacht area, yet Polish is our second most spoken language in the city. So inclusion in higher education and maybe to actually attract all those people into our community is very, very important. So I suppose the big thing as well is that we need to know is that while we're in this dilemma at the moment, and I'll ask the speakers this when you do your introductions, is that we're now looking at the development of a technical university for the GMIT and all that goes with that. And also we're looking at the extension and the expansion of NUI Galway locally as well. But as well as that, we have Equal Ireland, which is based in Galway City. And that's where I got my degree. So I was one of those guys that realized that the first year I was having too much fun. I preferred to go into business, and it took me a long time to go back to do my degree. So I went through the Equal Ireland process and thankfully eventually got it. And now I think that continual self-development is so important. But I was very lucky I had that out there for me. There are so many in our community that don't have that opportunity. And I know that, you know, we had hoped tonight that we'd have Owen Ward, who's from the Galway travelling community and is a huge access advocate. Unfortunately, Owen had something else happening tonight, a family event. But Owen is actually after getting on the NUI governing authority. And I think that's so important that we've got a member of the travelling community, a young man who's a huge role model for his community. And I know that we also had Sive McIntyre from the GMIT Students' Union. But again, Sive is not here because there's a breakdown in broadband and where she lives. And again, if we're going to be asking students to study at home at the moment where we are, I mean, that's one thing that we've always been proven about, is that we have in rural Ireland broadband that makes it next to impossible for young students to actually study. But in all of that, and this is why Padraic, you're here, is to tell us about student life at the moment, how much it's changed, the concerns that your students have as president of the Students' Union, and you know where we're at the moment, and you know it must be tough. So maybe Padraic, I might ask you to kick it off if that's okay, and then I'm going to ask Ciara, and then Annie, you might come in and that, and then we take a couple of questions maybe. Okay, so Padraic.
Hello everyone, I'm Padraic. So like this year has been kind of crisis after crisis from what we've seen. You know, as you just mentioned, like Sive can't be here because of broadband issues, and I'd say a research paper that like NUI Galway even published shows that like 22.1% of NUI Galway students are in poor broadband areas in Ireland, and it's 26.8% for GMIT students. And that kind of highlights like the fact that there is even though there was a laptop loan scheme and that helped bridge the divide on laptops, there's still a massive divide when it comes to internet and broadband and even study space. Students don't all have this equal at home amazing space that means that they can do great at college. You know, it's just not that easy. You know, not everyone can afford to, you know, come to Galway then as well, especially when it's going to be online and then study there, and you might not even get a good desk there if you do move to Galway because the price of accommodation has just shot up. So and when we say that like everything has gone up, Susie hasn't, and like even with Susie not going up, if I look at figures for since 2017 of how many applicants we had from Susie in NUI Galway, we had about 5,000, and now that's down to 4,500 this year. So like the amount of students on Susie's has gone down, the amount of students in NUI Galway has went up. So it doesn't exactly make sense on how that's happening. We should have more, if anything, we should have more on Susie as that goes up, but it's not. So we were obviously leaving out a vast majority of students who can't go to third level anymore because they just can't afford it, and they just don't have the money, especially in accommodation, because, if we look at what's been built, the most recent thing is the Westwood, and it's their cheapest room is $7.5 grand. That's across the board, is like 7,000 is starting in new accommodations. And like, when I went to college back in first year, I paid 3,300 euros for a twin room, and like that's what we could afford. But now we've got students who have to fork out over double that, and I can't get across how much that is crazy, and we're just not supporting them enough. And this year then brought its whole host of that's if we don't even have a pandemic. But like with the accommodation, and then this year it kind of brought everything out to light, where students were told to get accommodation, and then it went online, and now we have thousands of students who are out of pocket with their families, who can't, who just have accommodation, they can't use it, and they can't get refunds. So it's just put so many families in vulnerable positions when jobs were lost and just huge issues had happened. The only thing I'll mention then is, like, I know I'm just coming on with problems, but it is just what's happening. We also have, as Ciara will talk about in a second, like postgraduate, it's being unpaid, but it's across the board, it's unpaid, for even our nurses who worked in a pandemic, who are working right now, and who are actually being like maneuvered around from wards by being told that they're working for a different nurse as their understudy, but they're moved around as they get, as they're needed, and they should be paid for their work, but they're not. And we're still in this pandemic, and they should still be paid. I know Annie will probably go in on this too, but like it's just crazy that this is happening. And I really think education really needs to be rethought at third level. The issues have just been building up for years upon years. If I bring up, let's say, the repeat fee campaign that we launched this year, students were forced to pay 300 euro to do a repeat. Now, this was after you had to do an exam in your bedroom with no library access, no nothing, and this happened in NUIG Galway. But other institutions, let's say UCC, DCU, Trinity, Maynooth, all waived the fee, but NUIG Galway didn't. And this goes down to autonomy, where they can make their own decisions. And like, so it just doesn't work out. If we're going to have we need to have, first of all, publicly funded education, so that we solve the issues of Susie and the likes. Sorry. Sorry about that.
Are we live?
Do I cut?
No, you're grand. Keep going.
If we're gonna fix the problems of Susie and the likes, then we also need to, we need to rethink have publicly funded education, but also make sure that there's that level of scrutiny where we can check up on these decisions that are being made in university levels, like repeats. We can't have a different price for repeats in every part of the country, and it's random, and you can be just putting students in difficulties depending on where they are. So that's the end of my bit. Thank you.
No, thanks, Padraic. And it's great to see that student union presidents still have staff looking after them in the house there. So I presume that was somebody walking there. No, I'm only slagging. Yeah. No, look, I know that the work that you put in this year, and we really, really appreciate it. And I'm glad you touched on the accommodation. We might just come back to that, Annie, when we're talking in a few minutes. The exam fees, that's just madness. It's just crazy. But the big thing I would love to hear about, maybe Padraic, is what we might touch on when we come to questions, is just student life at the moment. I mean, the fact that in part of going to college was all about actually having a life and actually having fun and going out on a Thursday night. This is the first time I've ever seen Galway this quiet, so we might come back to that in a second. But Ciara, you're here as well now in the sense that you're representing the Postgrad Workers Alliance for NUIG Galway. And you're down as a self-organized collective of postgraduates seeking to improve their studying and working conditions in NUIG Galway. Fair play, unpaid labour, highlighting it at the fact the way it works, and you want to end that, and equal treatment as well for anybody who's actually working in the college from outside the EU. Why did you have to set this up? I mean, like, this is a college that has always prided itself of looking after its staff, or you would have thought, and looking after its students. I mean, students are the core of the college. Why did you have to set this up?
Well, thanks so much, Niall. So this, it's over the last to sort of slowly start to ask some postgrads in some departments to do unpaid teaching work. And they sort of present it as, oh, this is just part of, this is sort of what's expected. This is, you know, common practice sort of thing. However, it was certainly not the case years ago, and it's not the case in other EU countries. And it's not, sadly, just an issue that's restricted to NUIG Galway. It's happening in universities across the country. And they tend to not do it unilaterally across the college. They sort of just do it in some departments here and there. And it's very hard for postgrads to communicate with each other. They make it deliberately difficult. I know our postgrad rep doesn't have access to an email list of all postgraduates, our postgrad student rep, for example, because it has to go through the Office of the Dean of Graduate Studies for clarification and accuracy. So these kind of issues with communication mean that people often don't realize the policy might be different in different postgrads started PGWA, sorry, hope my internet's not cutting out there, to try and end this unpaid labor and to try and organize equal pay for equal work and make sure that everyone teaching at the university is being taught at the collectively bargained rate as agreed with SIP2 sort of thing. And we were in negotiations with HR along with our SIP2 rep, which seemed to be going very well. We were getting a lot of encouragers as workers, as employees, and then they suddenly did a U-turn. I think it would be in May at a meeting and just said, no, flat out, we refuse to have any more conversation here, refuse to have any dialogue here. You are students, you are not employees. And they sort of exploded it. And then you may have seen, if you've seen any of our campaigns, the Dean of Graduate Studies then sent out an email to all postgrad students saying that we should expect to provide unpaid teaching work this academic year, which especially in the context of the pandemic and the fact that at that point tutorials, which is a lot of the work postgraduate candidates do, a lot of the teaching work we do is often tutorials, was a lot of what was planned to be done in person. So they were essentially asking postgrads to teach for free on the front lines of a pandemic. Now, this is not being enforced unilaterally, but whenever we try to put pressure on them, let's say with our petition that we released in the summer, they tend to respond by saying, well, we'll just equalize down. We will pay no one for any teaching work to try and break our solidarity together. So this is kind of the context that we've been working in. We tried to go the official route, but we have just been rejected basically by them. SIP2 is currently in, sorry, the phrase is out of my head. They're currently contesting the legality of them forcing us to do unpaid labor. We've had great support from there. And the official SIP2 position is that no one should do any unpaid teaching work at NUIG Galway, but for whatever reason, the university is refusing to acknowledge this dispute. The farthest they've gone is to set up a working group, which is not really enough. And they just sort of trot out these sort of two main lines. One, that it's standard practice. Practice, just like a few figures. In most EU countries, PhD candidates are treated as full employees, as public servants. So that means they have access to social security and pensions and all of the supports that come along with that, as well as a proper wage, which accounts for teaching work and a much higher wage. The only other countries in the EU that use a stipend model are the UK, Spain, Portugal, and Belgium, I think. And also in terms of following up from what Padraic was saying, you know, the cost of living is extremely high in Ireland. You know, PhD scholarships like Susie have not gone up in recent years. And Some scholarships provide as little as €900 a month, which is the 4th lowest in the EU, even though our cost of living is among the highest. In fact, Ireland is the only country in the EU where it's possible for a PhD student scholarship to be less than a full-time minimum wage would be. So given that context, it's really harsh on any students in any sort of vulnerable financial situation to then not pay them for their teaching work, to ask them to do this work, which is highly skilled, highly time intensive, also emotionally intensive, for no financial benefit, and in a way that honestly isn't even that beneficial for your CV, because just tutorial work isn't considered very highly in academic, on your academic CV. It's not considered very good quality work, sort of thing. And in terms of, they try to say that it's training, but we don't get any training. You know, there's maybe in most departments, the standard practice would be all the tutors have a meeting before the semester. They have a quick look at a rough course outline, and then you have to go off, plan how to deliver the tutorials or the labs, and create your own lesson plans and run the class by yourself. You know, so it's hard to position that as training, especially they talk about 120 hours per year for 3 out of 4 years, so 360 hours unpaid. There's also issues with how you measure that as well. So, you know, does preparation count? How much does grading count for? So there's a lot of inequality built into how this is enforced across different departments. There's also an issue as well, just of how this is especially unfair towards international postgrads. They have the highest fees in the EU. If you're an EU student, you pay 5,000 per year, 5,500 a year here. Many EU countries don't even charge fees if you're coming as a PhD candidate, because they see you as an employee. And so you have exorbitant registration fees, costs of visas, limitations on working, as well as then being asked to undertake unpaid labor potentially. we've even come across cases where departments have asked PhD candidates to fund their own Garda vetting in order to pay for the privilege of working for free.
I know, Ciara. Look, I'm going to have to move around. But
Ciara,
Ciara, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but we'll come back to that in a second. How many are we looking at? How many people are actually being directly affected by this in Galway at the moment?
It's extremely hard for us to get numbers on this, and the university sets it up that way, unfortunately. We are trying to gather numbers. We know that it's particularly affects international students. It particularly affects students in often the sciences are very affected. I wouldn't want to guess a wrong number, but it's definitely a very large proportion of our postgraduate workers are affected by this.
I suppose this is the big problem. And before we go on to Annie here now for a second, it's just again is that, you know, while we pride ourselves on this amazing college in the city, it just seems that the student seems to be the biggest problem to running a proper college. I mean, you know, you'd nearly be better off having a college with no students, and that's why we might be getting more results because. And this is why they seem to be operating, the executive of the college, because we don't seem to be reinvesting back into to help the students. I mean, the college doesn't work unless you've got proper students on the campus, you know. So leading on then to our main speaker this evening, and somebody whom I'm a huge fan of, and I'm not just saying that. I actually had this brilliant opportunity when we went up to canvass in the by-election with Joanna Tuffy, and that was probably the first real time I got to know Annie. And it was just what a canvasser is the only way I can describe it. It was pouring rain, but absolutely just Trojan, absolutely one of the best campaigners I've ever seen out on the campaign trail. And Annie has been just a blast of fresh air that has come into the Senate, and as somebody who's actually really stirred it up in a positive way. And it's not like your traditional, you know, retirement home. It's great to have a young woman, but also somebody who's actually full of ideas, ambition, energy, that wants to actually turn around and, you know, shake up the Senate to actually do what it's supposed to do, raising hard questions. I mean, Annie's campaign, and everybody who knows Annie knows of her background from her time as working in the Students' Union, president of the USI, coordinator for the marriage equality campaign for students, volunteer of the director for the campaign to re-elect Michael D, a former president of NUIG Galway, and Pat Rabbit is a former president of NUIG Galway, and also the national canvassing coordinator for Together for Yes campaign. But it's just a huge honor, Annie, to have you here, and I hope that maybe we'll get a bit of a conversation going afterwards. But maybe if you could kick it off and just maybe say, first of all, thank you again for coming, Annie. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. I can talk about higher education, further education, access to education, students and workers. It's like my favorite topic in the whole wide world. So I like set a timer so I don't just like go off in a diatribe for a few hours about the importance of education. And it was really great to hear from both Padraic and Ciara about the issues affecting students in Galway, you know, and particularly around unpaid work. And I'll certainly come to that in a moment around the impact unpaid work across the education sector is having on access and building an education sector that is accessible to as many people as possible. I suppose when we're thinking about building a just education system, which is what I think we should be all striving towards, a just education system that is fair and equitable, and anyone who wants to access it can access it. And I will caveat that further and higher education is not for everyone. Lifelong learning is not for everyone, but lots of things are not for everyone. And that doesn't mean that the opportunity should be withheld from someone. And I think that's really important. The opportunity to access learning and knowledge and training and skills, and even just the academy and the exercise of learning something for the sake of doing it. All of those are really important. And I've so far in my short life thus far, spent an awful lot of time working around ensuring that education is as accessible as possible and that we smash down these barriers that are stopping people from coming in. But the barriers are large. There are many. I mean, the most obvious barrier to me is around fees and the cost of education. So we have our fee structure, the second highest fees in Europe, or indeed, seeing as the UK have out the door, the highest fees in Europe. We have very, very high fees in Europe, €3,000, and that's not even getting into the postgraduate fees, which are bananas. But we have very, very high fees in order to even get our foot in the door. And sometimes when I would have done a lot of lobbying around this before I went into the Senate, and when I was in the student movement, we do our lobbying and we're constantly knocking on people's doors and trying to get politicians to listen to us. So it's fun being on the other side. Come talk to me. But I used to get told, they'd be like, yeah, but we've got Susie grants, and like, sure, so many people get the grants, and like, if you get the grant, then it doesn't matter because you don't have to pay fees. So like, that is not the attitude to have. Either we believe that education is something that everyone should be able to access, and I do. I don't believe that education should be a privilege. I think it should be a very basic right, much like, and someone's like, oh, what, like healthcare and everything? I'm like, yup, much exactly like healthcare. We should have publicly funded healthcare. Everyone should be able to access education at whatever point in their life they want to do that, whether that's straight out the gap, post-leaving cert, off they go, let's do it. Or if that someone wants to go back later on in life. My mama went, when I was in school, she went to DCU via the Open University. And this was only in the early 2000s. And she was typing her essay on a typewriter. Like, we didn't have a computer, we couldn't afford that. And she was typing her essay on a typewriter. And then my dad would drive up so she could literally give the essay to her lecturer. That's how my mom did her course, while also raising us and everything else that was happening. And like, seeing that determination to be able to access learning and learning and knowledge and stuff. And she did philosophy and humanities, and we all had great conversations about what is a table and all of these things. But seeing someone, while I was still quite young, being thirsty for knowledge and thirsty for that opportunity, that she went and she fought, and she really fought very hard to be able to go and get that education. And it was just such a wonderful day then when we all got to go up to DCU and see her graduate, you know. And that really put that that fire into me, that anyone at any point of their life should be able to access learning opportunities. And that no one should be locked out from that. And obviously through the Open University and stuff, she got scholarships, so she didn't have to, the fees were not a barrier, but there were other costs associated, like, and I'm sure Padraic and Ciara can talk about this, you know, it's not just the fees, and fees are extraordinarily high. They are very, very expensive, but the actual cost of attending second level education is really, really high. You know, as been previously alluded to, we have a very high cost of living in Ireland. You know, accommodation is bananas. It's bananas. I actually don't understand. I kind of get into a cold sweat when I think about how much people are paying in student accommodation for these outlandishly fancy, like, geez, if they saw some of the places I lived when I was in college, whoo, 'tis far from this purpose-built student accommodation with a cinema and a bowling alley. I'll tell you that much. Not that who even lives in these, but you know what I mean. And it's just extraordinarily expensive, and like the poor parents and guardians. Oh my God, you know, and so like the accommodation is outrageous, and like we're obviously in a very particular environment at the moment where opportunities for students to actually earn money. You know, like we all would go scurrying away in the summer and work every flippant hour that the Lord gave us to try and get money together so we'd be able to afford going to college. And then I was in college, wasn't I, making sandwiches coming out of my ears, and I was working in a bar at night, and then I was cleaning something, you know, and we're all doing what we could to get ourselves through. But so there's an extra problem actually at the moment around costs for how students are actually affording to function at the moment when all this part-time work has dried up. We might get to that at another point. But just when, and we can go into other things that cost, but I think actually access to education is now becoming a genuine workers' rights issue. And what I mean by a workers' rights issue is that the requirement to have post-second level education is becoming more and more for all these different jobs. And if there is something that you were required to do in order to be able to enter the labour market, I think it is unfathomable that people are going to be locked out of that because of cost. I think that's bananas. Like that's simply not acceptable, particularly when those people are going to enter into the labour force and end up paying taxes, and the circular economy goes on, and the circle of life continues, and their money goes into the education system. And look, to me, it makes perfect sense. But anyway, so I actually think it's now, we talk about access of opportunity and equal opportunity, but I actually think it really is genuinely becoming a deciding factor so much in a person's future about whether or not they're able to access education, because there are certain job opportunities, and the government need to step up and face that they are making decisions right now that are locking out swathes of socioeconomic areas, swathes of particular backgrounds. They are locking them out of education, and no matter how much we say, well, there's a grant system here and there's a this, that and the other there, that's not dealing with the problem. We can have all the access plans in the world, but if there's a financial barrier in the way, then that's it. It's game over before we've even gotten in the door. And when we think about who is getting into higher and further education, we are creating a monoculture. If there is a financial barrier, it is always about who can get over that, or the special few who will pull up through various schemes and systems. You know, it is not a playing field that everyone can get in on the first place. So we are creating monocultures in our higher education and further education institutions, and we need only just look around the classrooms as who's in there and who's not in there to recognize that. And inclusion isn't something that you should be able to afford. Inclusion should just exist. Obviously, there's some other barriers I talked about, and I'll not go on too much longer. Like there's socio barriers. You know, certain communities would have very strong traditions of going on to education. Certain communities won't. We need only look at some of the schools and, you know, leagues and feeder tables and stuff like that. I mean, there's a real, we at some point when we started up the foundation of the state decided we just weren't going to talk about class anymore. We were just kind of going to pretend it just doesn't exist. It's fine. Don't worry about it, folks. We don't have any class problems anymore. And I think that has been a nonsense. And we have class systems in Ireland, and some people from certain classes are able to access education, lifelong learning, and do stuff like that, and some people are not. And the quicker we get to grips with that as a government, as a political movement, maybe the better it will be that we can actually, but that would be like admitting there is some sort of inequality, and woe betide we can't do such a thing. One of and I would love to have heard some of the other speakers who were supposed to be here this evening, particularly, you know, when we talk about like traveller communities and diverse backgrounds getting into education. You know, the number one way to ensure in an area where there wouldn't be traditionally a strong access to education is early years education. If you want someone age 16, 17, 18 to go on to higher further education, you need to invest in them when they're 2 or 3. And that is the number one way to ensure that they will be able to access lifelong learning in whatever opportunity that they want. It is extraordinarily expensive. We do not have a national early years education system here in Ireland, despite the fact we've got extraordinarily qualified people who are deeply underpaid. And it is not politically popular to do it, because those little puddings who are 3 or 4, it'll be another 16 years before they're out the gap. And there's no political gain in something in 16 years time. We work on 3 and 4 year cycles. So that's a really big problem. And until the political system gets to grips with that and decides to do something beyond the immediate, shiny investing in something, we're not going to solve this. I will talk very quickly and then I'll stop talking. I was told to speak for about 10 minutes about labor and working while in education. And that is about, like, if we look at the kind of people who are going into teaching professions, going into nursing professions, where they know that they have to take time out of the opportunity to earn money as part of their course, where they must do unpaid labor, which interferes with their opportunity to do paid labor in order to pay for them to have this education opportunity. They're not going to be able to do that. People going on to education are sacrificing 2, 3, 4 years of entering into the workforce. They're sacrificing 2, 3, 4 years of participating in society, and the economy and blah, 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 capitalism, whatever. And, so there's a sacrifice being made there of a couple of years. And if that person's also told, well, do you know what, if you want to do nursing and have this vocation and dedicate yourself to that, but also, by the way, we're going to work you to the bone and we're not going to pay a threepence for it. Like, that is saying to people from very particular backgrounds who cannot afford to do that. And that is not good for society when we have a monoculture in teaching, when we have a monoculture in postgraduate studies, when we have a monoculture in nursing, when we have a monoculture in pharmacy, medicine. All of this is not good. Like, this is bad for society when we don't have diversity in something. And when we have financial barriers, and financial barriers aren't just fees, but actually that people, if they don't have someone at home who can support them, if they don't have someone at home to be like, do you know what, don't worry about the fact that you can't do a job. You go and do your nursing training and we'll make sure that you're all right. If they don't have someone else to do that for them, a bank of someone or somewhere or loans, they can't do it. And that is wrong. It is wrong to lock people out of opportunity and learning due to fees. And it is wrong to lock them out of opportunity and learning because we expect them to do unpaid work. Unpaid work is an absolute sin. And I just have no interest in it. And so I might just wrap up on that point, but it's not just about fees and financial barriers. There's the barriers that also come with unpaid labor in education, how many years you have to take out of participating in society and earning. And someone said to me, they're like, well, if we start paying student nurses, we'll have to start paying everyone who's in education and they're doing unpaid labor. And I was like, yippity doo dah, we're going to pay everyone. I'm going to whoop open the can of worms on that one. Everyone should be paid. If we can pay apprentices, which is a male dominated industry, we can pay them on a sliding scale as they go through. We can pay our student nurses, who is a woman dominated industry, who are currently working on COVID wards, saving people's lives and keeping people well. We can pay them, and we can pay anyone who's doing unpaid labor. And quite frankly, unpaid labor is holding not only the education sector together, it is holding society together. And I won't go off on a tangent on that. I'll end on that, but I'm very happy to come and talk to you about the unpaid labor that is holding this country together. And all the people are doing all the work to keep this economy going and not getting a threepence for it.
Thanks, Annie. And again, that's why I love you. You're just brilliant. You're really, you can see that energy, I hope, Padraic and Ciara. Just quick, first of all, the fact that you mentioned the Big Start campaign, I mean, you're right. I mean, like, it's the underinvestment that's such an early stage. And, when we do talk about higher education, it's giving everybody the opportunity to actually start off first and get in there and actually to be able to make a change for it. But I'm just saying, just that Cllr's report that has highlighted the underinvestment for years. Again, I suppose I'm going to actually ask you, Annie, to just come back in just 1 second for a second of this. It has shown significantly the underinvestment that is there for higher education. So when we look at, we'd say, the TUI developments that we're looking at for GMIT, along with the Sligo and Letterkenny, we're looking at what's happening in NUIG Galway, where they rely on the extra students. And by the way, Padraic, this is why we have a problem with housing in Galway. With too many students being accepted without enough accommodation in the first place. The college shouldn't be allowed to bring in extra first years unless they have accommodation for them. It's very simple to that, because otherwise you're going to see what I saw when I was in the governing body up in the GMIT, lads traveling down from Tullamore on a daily basis, 4 or 5 lads in a car, racing down, going back home. And you know what? It's by the grace of God that nobody's gotten hurt so far in those accidents. And that's what we have to be so careful about. So I suppose it's that. But Annie, I'm going to let you back in just on that thing, just on the Cllr's report. It seems that there's no investment. I mean, where are you? What do you think?
The Cllr's report, I'll tell you a quick story about the Cllr's report. Jeez, I have a dog barking here in the background. The Cllr's report was launched. I was only president of USI, but
is that it? You've trained the dog to actually bark at the Cllr's report, is it?
I was president of USI only a couple of days when the Cllr's report was launched. It was like my first big hurrah, and it was on the first day of the Students' Union training. So everyone's on their way to Athlone for the Student Union training. my car had just been stolen, and it was like the biggest media event I've ever had in my whole entire life, because the Castles report was launched, and it was as if the decision was going to be made that day about how we were going to fund higher education. Now, the Castles report was launched 4 years ago. Still no decision has been made on that, and it was very, very clear in the Castles report that for a very long time there had been underinvestment in education. And again, it's this idea of kind of vocation. They'll just do it. They'll just pull themselves together. They'll, you know, just kind of, the system will just somehow manage, will just siphon more and more people in, and it'll just keep going, because it has always kept going. You know, and we keep talking about the metaphorical road that has run out for funding higher education. Like, that road ran out when I was president of USI, and that was ages ago. You know, and the system was relying on unpaid teaching staff, on precarious work contracts, on only bringing in lucrative research projects, which requires a very high level of particular very high skill set, and pushing away that blue sky research thinking, which is so crucial within higher education settings. So, I mean, there's just been absolutely donkey's years of underinvestment in education, and it's not underinvestment from the students' perspective. Students have been getting up and going to college for years and doing their best, and the poor staff, very often postgraduate staff, are doing their very best to hold a creaking system together. There's been lots of talk. I mean, there's been lots of real interesting whispers and murmurings now coming from the new minister. You know, like, oh, well, we know the fees are too high, but it's time to make a decision. So I will certainly be hot on his heels for the next while. The excuse for why we haven't done anything is it's gone to Europe. We have to decide if we can do the right thing. Have you ever heard such nonsense? But it'll be very interesting now. That's due to come back fairly soon. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes back from that, because either we invest or we don't invest, and that's it.
And but like, when we're in an opportunity now where, like, when we get out of this pandemic, the investment in education is going to be so important, because we're going to have to figure out a way that Ireland Inc. can actually be more attractive, but also is that we're going to have to upskill. We're going to have to change, you know, directions for a lot of people, the way we work from home, everything like that. And again, as pointed out earlier on about the broadband, is that, like, I mean, all those small things under investment, you know. Padraic, do you want to come in there, or Ciara, just and ask any questions there for a second?
Like, even just to back Annie's point, like, our education system, I was literally told in NUIG Galway that you know, the repeat fee, the money they collect from that is vital, and they rely on it to fund the rest of the college, and they couldn't possibly get rid of it. Like, the idea that you have to rely on money of failed students, I think, should speak a lot about of our system. The fact that you have to have money from failed students just so they can repeat their exams, so then they can further on, so they can keep going. So I don't know, it's really hard. It does, we do need a revamp. That report just kind of does shows how, like, we haven't even changed our ways after it came out. I am hopeful with a new minister, though, in higher education, that we might get something, and his murmurings have been, you know, a little bit too promising. I'm nearly getting excited. So I would love if we did invest properly, you know, and we rethought it all. I would like to ask Annie, maybe, like, what are your thoughts on what's going to happen next year? You know, we've offered students thousands of extra spaces because of the CEO mess up and stuff, and, like, let's say, as you said, about accommodation being an issue. How are we going to deal with that next year, when we're going to have this huge influx now of students who came in this year?
Okay. Padraic, I've got a question here for you, just in relation to the accommodation. The protest in the Quad last year, and I was delighted to be able to come up and support you that time for it. And I do think the fact that town and gown, again, it's so important. So I would, you know, Annie, you probably agree with me, it's very important that you talk to your local politicians and let them know what's happening, because, guys, you are part of the economy for Galway City, but you won that campaign last year with a 1-year reimbursement on the increase, but the university is going to increase the accommodation fee next year. I mean, are we going to be seeing you back in the Quad, or what do you reckon? Are they going to play ball?
See, from discussions, we were told that, like, it would be back to zero, because the way they actually even did it, it was like a 4%. They're going to rebate the 4%, but it was a rebate rather than actually just putting it back, meaning that they could put the 4% on, like, they could double it up next next time, which is an issue. So you may actually see us back in the quad. I myself was sleeping in the grass there for a couple of weeks. I think we did 2 weeks altogether. Just highlighting the issue, and like it literally is pricing students out, especially if it's going to be on campus accommodation, because that should be the cheapest ones. Like the room I had, the €3,300 room, that went last year, that was actually 3,900. So in between over 2 years, it went up €600 before we kind of even did that protest. So like the prices were still going up. It's just we finally got a stop to it on 1 year, but like it's still happening, and there needs to be like higher level than us to be camping out every year to stop them increasing the price so students can afford to go.
Yeah, and again, I just think, Padraic, we should really look at that thing with the accommodation, where when we're building student accommodation, it can't be just to be turned into short-term nets in the summer, then for tourist accommodation. It falls down. The good thing that's come out of this mess at the moment is the amount of available property in Galway City, Annie, from the short-term letting that was used for Airbnb. We had so much in Galway City, but it wasn't just Airbnb; it was all those other platforms as well. But thankfully now they're at a council level. First of all, it's coming online for us to use, but also for student accommodation. Ciara, you mentioned SIP2 there. It seems that one of the issues is just recognizing that workers are workers. I mean, you are workers. I mean, you're putting in the work. I mean, first of all, it's great to see that the union is actually backing you, and that's great that's happening. But how do we actually make the college realize that you are workers?
I think that, yeah, for sure. It's one of the big issues that we're sort of battling over at the moment. It seems to be one of their lines that they just won't cross. At any point, they refuse to ever refer to us as workers or employees or anything like that. Staff, even though it's quite funny, on quite a few of the university websites, where it lists staff, it'll list the postgrads who are teaching. So they kind of contradict themselves there. I think we're really hoping to get more momentum from SIP2 National as well. We've had great support from SIP2 and NUIG, and they fully support our position that no one should do any unpaid labor at any point, and that we are workers. So they're trying to help us fight the university to recognize it, but it is kind of a national problem with the culture around Irish universities' relationship with postgrads and insistence on your students, not workers. So for example, there was an all-staff webinar in the summer about how teaching online was going to look, how you should prepare your classes for that, information on that whole system. No postgrad teachers were invited to that meeting, so we weren't able to join and get information on what platforms we were going to use. So for example, we used Blackboard, not Zoom. We didn't find that out for a couple of months, unless we happened to have a personal relationship with a member of staff who told us, but it should never come down to something like luck like that. So those are the types of issues as well that come up. We were excluded from any conversations about the university reopening, anything like that. So yeah, I wish I had a simple answer for how we can get them to recognize us as workers. We're trying to highlight the fact that this is the anomaly and considered bad practice across the EU. We're hoping that might possibly have some sway with them in terms of reputation, because we want to be in the group with Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands and Germany, not with not with the UK or Portugal necessarily, in terms of like gold standard of education and quality of life as well. Especially with it's very unattractive prospect to do postgrad work in Ireland compared to other countries, if you do your research, compared to other EU countries. And that's a shame, because then we'd miss out on wonderful talent. I know a lot of international PhD students who say they regret picking NUIG Galway because they've been so mistreated, and that's heartbreaking to me.
And that thing is Galway, like I keep banging this back, like it is a student town. If you're putting somebody on that kind of pressure, they're not enjoying the cities either, and it's cheap labor. That's something I thought we got rid of a long time ago, Annie, just in case you want to come in on those two, but I have a question here for you. And again, it's a student housing. We have a shortage of about 2,500 student units in Galway. But as you've mentioned, we're only seeing growth in luxury units. which are aimed at the mythical wealthy international student. And we've seen with this pandemic the over-reliance on these international students for cash cows really for the college. And actually this is the same thing as well right across. Any hopeful signs around this improved policy on these issues, do you think?
No. No. No, I don't think so. I wish I'd come here and be like, I fixed it. No, I like it. I think the underneath the international students, the back really has broken on that. And I think there's been a real shock to the system in terms of how much international students hold up our educational institutions and the loss of them, even though we haven't had, there hasn't been a dramatic loss in them. There's a lot of international students who would be here for 4-year courses, 3-year courses. They've all come, a lot of them have come back. But the shock to particularly the university sector with the loss of international students, and like they have been like, there's no real limit on fees there. You know, the sky is the limit, it would seem, for fees for international students. We can just go on and on until the end of time. You know, and particularly then for some of our highly competitive courses, medicine, stuff like that, the fees are eye-watering. You know, we're talking about $250,000 for GEM for some graduate medicine courses for international students. Like that is a lot of money that we have people paying. And I don't know that there's going to be any relief on that because it's such a vital part of the sector. It's been kind of been written into the fabric of how we fund higher education. I think international students will continue to be quite a lucrative area. And there's not a single university or institution that is not hard chasing international students. There's whole units invested in it. There's a huge amount of money sending delegations and stuff. So even if we do, through miracle work, get publicly funded education, I think we're still going to find the international sector being very difficult. And also there's this idea somehow that international students, because they're already paying such high fees, can therefore just have like these endless money pots. And like that's not how it's working. Like I have an international student who got in touch with me who is like, I can't do any part-time, I have no part-time work. I have no money. I can't live. I can't access any supports, you know. And like, I was like, I guess you could go to St. Vincent de Paul. Like, you know, like there is not all international students are these like money bags, you know. There's a lot of like families at home saving really hard to pay the fees so they can come here and further their education. And this idea of the mythical eternal pot is doing a real disservice, I think, to our international students.
Yeah, and you know, and I suppose the big thing is, I remember when I was mayor of the city, I got to go to China a couple of times, and we had the begging bowl out there showing off what was in Ireland for colleges and that type of thing. And you know, like, we're bringing all these students over here, we're putting them into the college, we're using them for the 6-7 months, you know, to actually use that cash. But I mean, at the end of the day, is the type of degree that we should be promoting and pushing and actually making sure that the qualification of the college keeps an all-time high, rather than we have to be very careful that we just don't be providing a course as well that isn't the right thing. Yes, Padraic. Yeah.
I was just going to come in on, like, you know, international students, I think were most hard done even this year though. Like the fact that they were to fly here, set up shop, you don't know anyone, especially if you're brand new, okay, and you signed up to this place, and then you paid, you know, up to 40, you could be paying 40 grand like for a year, and then you're, you know, it's all online and they got nothing back, nothing.
I heard the pizza up in Cardiff villages are supposed to be fabulous. Yeah, that's an in-house joke, Annie. It's where the student accommodation is, and again, these have to self-isolate for a period of time as well, you know.
They were charged €30 a day for food then, or for them to be, if you were isolating, to be able for them to deliver you food. So like, they are seen as cash cows. And then, you know, if you're like, imagine, if you just put your head, like, you know, if you were them, imagine you've flown off to a random country, you know, you set up, you don't know anyone, and then it says all online, you're not on campus, you're just doing your lectures on your laptop. You'd be enraged that you paid so much money and you could still be back home, or you could have just done an online university probably free. So like, I think that's the biggest criminal thing we've done this year, is the fact that we've charged, and no TD is going to really defend them too much, especially if they're in government, because they can't vote. Like, you know, we're so I don't even know how. It's really hard to help them, but you just want to, and it's just, I don't know.
Well, and this really is affecting our our international reputation, just to put in on that, like we rely on our reputation. Like people come here because we're fun and we're cracking tiddly tie, whatever. You know, they come here because it's a great country to come to. But like these sort of things do damage to our international reputation. We have international medical students where the insurance has gone up for them. That will ripple through our pot of countries that we have built up relationships with in order to entice medical students over here. And now it's like, well, actually Ireland, you know, they're not looking after them. They're making them pay that extra insurance. We just don't know about that. You know, those reputations for international students are being built up over years. You know, they didn't just decide to pop here one day and suddenly everyone's coming to Ireland. You know, that kind of stuff will damage our international reputation. So actually politicians should be interested in that, because it is damaging to our economy. It is damaging to our reputation. And if we want to be the best little country in the world to come and learn and study and live, we can't be acting the maggot with our international students, which is quite frankly what we've been doing for a long time.
That's long term though, is the thing. That's a lot, as you said, let's say with the educate, like, you know, teaching at the age of 2 or 3, you know, that's thinking 12 years down the line. And that's the exact same with this, you know, that you're thinking about the people who go back home and after 10 years and they've told everyone, you know, go to Ireland to study there, or what they're going to be doing for the next 10 years is telling people do not go there whatsoever. So like,
well, what I would say to you, Padraic, as somebody who has a shop in town that relies on the international tourists as well that come to the city, I can tell you that thankfully Galway is Europe's friendliest city, and we can wear that with, you know, a pin of pride. We were voted that recently by Condé Nast. But the other thing is that we have to make sure is that, look, mistakes have been made the first 6 months this year, right? And we all acknowledge that. We just have to make sure that when we do attract foreign students to the city, is that they're looked after and they're given a service that they paid for, and they're looked after. And I would hope that we would see that happening first, you know. Listen, time is running out here, but Annie, I've got one question for you, and actually I'm going to bring in everybody else in this one. And it says, great to see the mention of lifelong learning and the importance of early years for driving inclusion success. Higher education is increasingly framed as valuable for innovation and economics, but on a very different level from recognizing the importance of education for equality. So the question is, while good to see recognition of the sector with its own ministry now, is there a way we can change the vision of higher ed to being part of the fabric of building equality? I think that's a really, really strong question, because, you know, at the end of that, and this is going back to our roots, Annie, I think it's, you know, this is what education is really, really about, you know, and it's so important that we have it. So would you mind taking that? And maybe I might ask Ciara and Padraic as well with that.
Yeah, I mean, like, we pride ourselves on being the land of saints and scholars. Like, we've learning in all sorts of different formats have kind of been in our fabric for a very long time. And I do think, you know, there was a conversation had about whether separating the two education departments would actually have an impact on this. I think education should be a continuum. I think it should be from you know, cradle to grave, if however close you want to get to it. You know, it should be an entire lifelong opportunity, and that should be tied into enterprise, should be tied into social, it should be tied into everything. So I am a little bit, you know, how will we ensure that continuum now that we've separated out the two? But also then I hope that by separating out the two, that the post second level sector is looked at as a whole. So we traditionally just went higher education, off you went, and then there's kind of dilly-dallying with apprenticeships and other sorts of bits and pieces. So actually, hopefully now there will be a holistic look actually at what do we mean by post second level lifelong learning, and how do we ensure access of opportunity, equality of opportunity for whatever level or style of learning, and that the department will then look at adapting and making it accessible in sorts of different ways. Like we already have, you know, like short courses, like Springboard is a great thing. Our apprenticeship sector is expanding and growing, and creating this really holistic whole sector, I think, is going to be really important. And that's what so when I was originally like, oh no, we're separating it out, what are we going to do? I was like, wait, no, this is brilliant. Because now we have this opportunity to really allow the sector thrive and grow, and allow it to become a fabric of woven all through society. And it's not just those special privileged people over there go to universities and the rest of us just live our lives, that it's actually woven into policies, departments work together, you know, that it's all seen as a continuum, and that education is just a part of the fabric of Irish society, that anyone who wants it at any point can access it, and their time learning is also valuable as the time that they may or may not then afterwards use that to contribute to society. And I think that's going to be really important, that we see the value both while you're in college, not just lazy sods, and then the opportunity that brings for that person afterwards.
Brilliant. Good. Ciara, just on that, the same one, just related to the factor now the sector has its own minister now. I mean, we've got an opportunity here for him to actually address your issues. I mean, we've got a senator here tonight. I mean, how do we get the minister to actually realise the problems that your members are facing right now?
Thank you. Yeah, I think if we can try to just keep you know, spreading the message of what's happening for starters. I think a lot of people aren't even aware of the scale of unpaid labour that's going on in universities by postgrads. I think as well, there's a little bit of a block that we came across. We asked the Minister for Education about this. We had some questions put to him and he just said, well, it's the university's business. The universities are autonomous, sort of thing. So I think, you know, perhaps if we can try and keep the conversation going, get a bit more spread, maybe a bit more political support to try and push them on that a little bit further and say, well, do you think it's acceptable for people to be providing unpaid labor, you know, and push them a little bit more on that. Perhaps we could get some pressure top down that way, would be what we'd be hoping for at this stage, I think, because it's very easy to say, oh, well, it's up to the university, but it's not just happening in Galway, it's happening across the country. There's other groups in TCD and UCD having the same issues. So if we can maybe try and organize a bit more, I think we're trying to put together a charter across the country. It's tricky to organize and spread that as well would be great. And
I'll be the first to put up my hand. I mean, when I ran for the general election last February, we had the hustings up in NUIG Galway. Only bar one TD turned up. The rest didn't bother turning up on the night. I mean, I remember actually being asked the question myself, and I really didn't know enough about the subject. And I'd put hands up and say it. But again, this is what part of the campaigning is about. You actually feeding the information to public reps so that they know what we actually present, you know, in some way for that. And I suppose with the amount of work that Annie has been doing, even with Aon as well. I mean, we've got a really strong team now in education, which is brilliant, you know. Padraic, anything there you want to just say on that one about higher ed being part of the fabric of building equality?
Like, yeah, I think we kind of touched on it even just throughout the night, kind of like in every level, like, you know, there's just so much financial barriers that we have to fix to be able to get any kind of equality, and then to even fix the problems that are happening then in the institutions, like you know, you mentioned autonomy there. If I get one more email that mentions why a problem can't be fixed because of the autonomy of universities, I'm gonna go cracked. And there's these go-to lines that, you know, the part that, like, you know, ministers have been able to create, and then there's these go-to lines that the institutions have been able to create that just conflict, mean that they can just blame each other very easily. You'll get people who say, oh, you blame the department, blame the HEA, or blame the institution. You know, it's one of the three, and you know, if you email the other one, they point around, and it's this long game of nothing being done, nothing being fixed for everyone, because we've just, you know, we've created this great way that they don't have to do it. And, you know, we the only way we can do that is funding the education system properly, and then like reworking how it's done. I know there's a bill coming down the line. It's been coming down the line for yonks, from what I can understand, on, let's say, changing the composition of, let's say, of governing bodies for universities. And from what I can understand, Harris is trying to get that done this side of Christmas. And that is something that probably should have been done way before my time. And hope that I am a glass half full person, and I am hopeful that we'll fix some of the issues that we do get. And like, so there is hope this year. You know, we've got the department, we've got a bill coming. You never know, we might even get funding for higher education. So a little, if we have a good few more senators like Annie, you know, we never know. So
on that note, I'm going to actually just give it to Annie. Annie, does anything else there you want before I wrap it up?
No, 2020 is the year for funding of higher education. I think that what I will say, the coronavirus has shown if they want to put money into something, they can put money into something. Money is being invested into the system. We haven't dealt with the fees issue, but money has been found. If we want, like, if where there's a will, there is a way. And if the government genuinely want to deal with the sector and actually put the money where their mouth is and say this is worth it, because it is worth it. Investing in education from early years all the way to end of lifelong learning is worth it at every level, for the individual, for the economy, for society. You know, it is good for business at all levels. So if they really want this thriving economy that they talk about, they've just got to invest in it.
Yeah, and again, what I would say to you is that's just the proper way to finish up. Was I remember when we went for the bid for Galway 2020, and I'll just finish up with this. I remember we were talking about whole creative thinking, and you know what basic education was all about. It's creative thinking. I remember telling this story when we were the judges in Brussels when we won the European Capital of Culture, which was supposed to happen in 2020, which was never happened. But the whole thing was, and this is going back to this question here, is, you know, it's not just about innovation or economics. Creative thinking was, there was a student in NUIG Galway and he was studying the heart of a fruit fly, right? You imagine, first of all, where is the heart of a fruit fly in the first place? But he reckons he'd found the cure for Alzheimer's through the heart of this fruit fly. And he's been working on this project for years. Now, first of all, how did he even think about that the heart of a fruit fly was going to be for Alzheimer's? How did you find the heart of a fruit fly? Okay. And then how did he actually think? And that's what creative thinking is all about. And that's why education and making mistakes and learning in colleges and writing papers and educating each other and sharing that information as the postgraduate, all that, that's what education is. And that's why it's so important for when we grow and go forward. And all that. So I suppose we could have touched on so many other things tonight. Andrew O'Wale is our party chairman in Galway, and I just want to thank you, Andrew, for putting this together tonight for us. And Ivana was with us earlier on, just talking about the Polish situation at the moment in the city and how important it is to campaign for that. To Padraic and to Ciara, thank you for absolutely everything you're doing. Keep up the amazing work. Stay safe. And to Annie, thank you for coming down or sharing your evening with us on a Thursday evening and making sure that we got through this. And I really appreciate the help, and keep up the amazing work. We've a really good team at the moment in the Labour Party. We've seen a lot of changes. We've become a campaigning party again, which is brilliant, and we can see it. And there's that campaign that we're doing at the moment, the two campaigns. One is about the secondary schools, and that the fact is you don't have to have, you know, your firstborn must be related to so and so, which is brilliant. And the second one, which is the new campaign that we're doing in relation with Labour Youth as well, is that if you're born in Ireland, you should have the same rights. So we're a campaigning party, and I just want to thank Annie for all the great work you're doing, and we look forward to talking to you soon.